Thanks for coming out again on a Friday. So I just wanted to recap a little bit with our previous workshops. There might be a couple of stragglers coming in. How many of you have attended any of the four? Some of them. How many of you guys went to the first one? That was at Port of Portland?
Yeah.
Anyone? You did, Gregor? Okay. And then how about the second one? Was that also at Port of Portland?
I didn't go to that one.
Were you one of
I
those
think
three?
I was at the first one.
First one
of the
too?
first, yeah.
Okay. Then these two have been at Hatch.
Mhm.
So then I've got videos for all those. Some are better quality than others, but trying to package that up so that if you run into people or meet someone who might be interested in that, you could send them to the link and they can watch whatever section of that. So we've got that for reference. So today we're going to cover a little bit of statistics, talk about some voting techniques, a couple other tools that I think are pretty generic and useful, and then do a little recap and say, okay, where do we go from here? What's next steps? And Reed's going to talk us through one of his projects where we got a little data analysis we can talk through too. So this is the checklist. If you don't have this, let me know. I can resend this out again, but this is the framework I use quite a bit for running through a problem using the DMAIC model. So, and so through the different trainings, I've kind of highlighted what we're focusing in on and what section of it. So now we're in the back end of this, kind of talking about the final few tools around improvement and control. So that's kind of a framework that I think is helpful or useful on kind of tackling bigger challenges or problems and coming up with a clear problem statement and then putting a team together to walk through and kind of methodically chip away at this problem. So that's kind of what we've been talking through in these different workshop series. So that's what we'll talk about today. So the agenda would be just kind of a quick review of where we're at, which I kind of covered a little bit, and then Reed will talk about some of the project he's been working on with DEQ. I'll just touch on a little bit more on statistics. That's a whole nother animal of training material and topics, but maybe just kind of get a feel for your background a little bit, and then maybe there's a specific training module or something or topics we can go through, because that's, when we get into some of the Six Sigma stuff, it's really heavy in the statistics. So depending on your background, it may be new to you, or it may be something you've seen in the past, or taken classes in college, or heard about it one time, or have learned on the fly. So it really varies on people's backgrounds with that, and comfort level. Some people just really turn off when we start talking about getting into the real detailed numbers like that, but others would get really excited too. But then we'll talk about a couple other tools and kind of wrap up. So just to recap again, the first thing we talked about in this define phase was figuring out where the opportunities might be and coming up with kind of a plan and a problem statement that says this is what the issue is. Sometimes it's more like opportunity, not necessarily a specific problem. Like I think the embassy suites would be, hey, we know we're spending a lot of money. It's not, yeah, we have a budget for it, we're not over budget, but we know there's opportunity there. So you could just say that the problem is we're spending this much money on wasted food, or we don't really know, it's just we know there's a lot of opportunity there. As you get into like measure, you'll get more clear about, hey, this is actually, there's not much we can do about this percentage of it, but there is a certain percentage that is some big opportunity. So starting off, that define can be really challenging because you don't necessarily know how bad it is. You think there's an opportunity there, but you have to still go get some data to get more clarity around that. So there's a little bit of back and forth with, I think there's a problem, where's the data? The data tells me it's worse or it's not as bad as I thought, but actually it showed me there's something else I should pursue. So there's a little bit of working through that to get to something that's very clear where, okay, yes, that's a lot of money, or that's a lot of waste, or that's a lot of time we're spending. And we all agree, and the management agrees that this is something we're going to tackle. And so we're going to put a team together so that we can make sure it's cross-functional and make sure that we're putting enough resources on it and that there's buy-in for whatever changes end up coming down the line. And we're not too narrow focused about what kind of solutions we come up with. So that's all part of kind of the define, is getting organized around that. And there's a charter form that you should have. If you don't have that, I can send that out too. And that just kind of gives you the paperwork that says, this, do we all agree that this is the problem, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and who we need to be involved in that. So that can take a little bit of time depending on what you've got available already. Once that's been agreed to, whether it's formally someone signing that piece of paper or at least they're saying, yep, I'm committing the resources and time to it, then you get in and start looking at, so what data do we have? What observations have we made? Do we go out and look at the area, study it, do audits, just sit and observe, interview people in the process. You're trying to absorb as much information you can get your hands on. And then try to capture that into some kind of graphical view or presentation format so everyone understands what the issue is. We also talked a little bit about making sure we have good, solid data to work from. If we have problems with the data collection or the information we're getting, we need to try to clean that up somehow, whether we have to manually go back through and clean it up or put in a better system and then start collecting fresh, better data going forward. And then we get into kind of the analysis part. And so this is the part that people like to jump to analyze and prove. People like to jump into that right away. And the idea with this is, let's hold off on that till we really understand the process first. And we have some data to kind of look at. And then we can come in and say, is that really what's going on? Is that really the root of what's happening? Is this where the most of the problem is happening at in this department, this area, this day of the week, this month in the year, this supplier, this customer, wherever that breakout is. And then we really try to figure out, why is it happening? It's not just people are lazy or they're not trying. There's something in the process usually that's broke or not clear or misleading or hasn't been figured out or no one's actually figured out the right process and documented what to do. And so you have some people who do it well and others that don't, and they've never really been trained. So we try to figure out, what's the process breakdown that went wrong, and that's what we're going to try to fix. Then you actually get to the improvements at this point, and it may be improvements people came up with really early on, but now you've got evidence, you've got a team buy-in, you've got data, all that is supporting this. Because I think what I often see is people pitching ideas all day long to their leaderships, but when you bring your improvement idea to this stage and you have all this like homework and research and background data to provide, they're much more likely to say, yes, let's go forward with that right away. Versus you kind of say, we should fix it this way. Maybe that will work, but they're not very confident in your answer because they haven't seen you put in all this extra work at a time. So this takes longer to do, and that's why people don't do it. But when you get to this point, it doesn't get stuck here, which happens a lot. And so so you're doing more upfront work here so that this part goes through hopefully faster and with quicker approvals. And they're actually confident that what you're proposing is going to work. We don't get back here, try this, and say, well, that didn't work. We already know, we have really good confidence at this point that it's going to work because we've done all this research and analysis. So that's why this model is powerful, but it's also why people don't necessarily go down this route, because it takes longer. And it's easier to just throw out a bunch of ideas. And sometimes those work, and so we think, oh, a couple times it worked, let's just keep doing that, and hopefully we get lucky this time, but it's not a very reliable method of doing that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about not just after the improvements are working, but how do we make sure they sustain themselves in the long run. And so that gets dropped a lot too, is yay, we got results. And then 6 months later, things fall back to where they were, and we've lost the gains that we got. Is there any questions about kind of the big picture structure? So I think we've touched on each of these in the different other workshops, but just want to make sure that kind of all ties together. Anything else, Brett, you want to add to it? You've been through a lot of this type of stuff before.
I know, I see that stuff all the time. I have guys that come in, I get a lot of people, and they'll come in and go like, we need a dust collection system. Why? Because we have dust. No, I mean, why do you gotta give me something, I can't go up to like the people above me and say, look, you know, this is gonna cost this much and this is why we're gonna do, you have to give me something. So you kind of have to go through with what's the problem, how big of a problem is it, how does it affect anything else? Give me some numbers, you know, are we gonna get paid back? So it's all, you know, it's way more fun just to go in there and go, I can fix that and fix it and be done, but, yeah.
Or throw money at something and say, yeah, I think this might work, but
Right.
you only get a couple of times to throw a lot of money at something and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
They start looking elsewhere for people.
Well, yeah, you gotta start looking somewhere else to get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all just, it makes sense kind of stuff, you know.
Any other thoughts? Make sense? Okay. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Reed. Give you some update on what you've been working on. How many of you have seen an update on this project already? You have, Gregor, you've seen,
Just last week.
what did you see? Last week, really?
Yeah. Metro, yep.
Yeah.
This will be a little bit
Something,
different
or-
stuff. Yeah, I think it's not so. Okay, so some of y'all are familiar with kind of the overall study that we were working on, but PSU was contracted by DEQ to kind of do a comprehensive study of wasted food in the state of Oregon. So my particular area was studying commercial wasted food, and we worked with 13 businesses developing 15 case studies to kind of look at why waste is occurring, what type of waste is occurring, and test best practices on how to reduce that waste. So we definitely had a variety of participants from institutional schools, hospital, down to mom and pop kind of restaurants. Tested a lot of different practices, not as many as we would have liked. We weren't really able, because of the timeline, as well as the willingness of participants, we weren't able to do a lot of kind of infrastructural stuff. So buying new plates, for example, is kind of off the table for a lot of our businesses. But we did a lot of analysis and worked with businesses to kind of pinpoint where waste was occurring. And there were a few that we kind of documented best practices that were already occurring. That's kind of to develop our toolkit. The general process was pretty similar, somewhat kind of similar to process improvement generally. I would definitely add that not only was data gathering kind of numbers and sense kind of way important, but talking with employees was kind of the most vital resource we had. So it was kind of especially uncovering causes of waste. For example, at one kind of corporate cafeteria, you know, we saw ridiculous amounts of overproduction that, you know, could have easily been attributed to kind of employee error, but it turned out it was really caused because their corporate client mandated that they had full buffets until the end of their mealtime. And so I was like, okay, well, it really wasn't the employee's fault. It was a client expectation. So definitely support doing that, even though it's a lot of work. And even though I'm a data nerd, so I wanted to get right to the data, but we needed to talk to people. So I'll talk a lot about this caterer example, but if we have time, I have a retail cafe example that also had some nice messy data that we got into. So this caterer, as with many caterers, had kind of a problem of chronic leftovers. They would generally overplan, and as it turns out, their clients would often overplan, and their guests would often overcommit to attending. And so we saw chronic overattendance, but it was still kind of permeated with this fear, underattendance. But there was this fear by the caterer of running out, and that was kind of, we thought maybe irrational. How is that grounded in reality? But the worst thing they could do in their minds was to run out of food. So part of this was they had stacks and stacks of old event records that they couldn't use. It was all in paper, in boxes, and really rarely utilized, if at all. But we thought, you know, we have some time and capacity. Why don't we go back and actually quantify, is this fear real? And is there any way we can target kind of situations where bringing extra food isn't necessary? Or and then another thing we kind of measured was occasionally, if they thought there might be under attendance, they would bring a lot of the food to prepare on site, and so they could take it back unprepared and reutilize it. Generally, though, they would bring most things fully constructed. So we were able to find there was a significant increase in food waste reduction when they constructed on site. So that practice was great, but again, we also need to quantify when is it appropriate to use that practice, or when can you feel really comfortable with that. So the data, of course, we had a lot of data, but it was ridiculously difficult to get access to. Insofar as we had to take, they wouldn't let us take it off site, so we had to take pictures of each of these event records and then digitize them. we pulled only a few types of things from there. I mean, they were pretty comprehensive, but we ended up pulling kind of date, event, name, if they had it, or type, guests booked and guests served, as well as notes on leftovers. It was a pretty inconsistent application, so many didn't have notes about how much food was left over or not, but enough did that we were able to analyze that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we were kind of curious, does attendance vary by time of year? You know, we heard a lot in their interviews that seasonally in the winter there's a lot of, you know, weather events or people just holiday parties that don't get fully attended by the type of event. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we thought, well, maybe weddings have kind of an emotional reason to be there, and RSVP might have higher attendance than corporate events or casual, you know, birthday parties, et cetera, et cetera. And then also size of the event. Is a bigger event more likely to be underattended than a smaller event? And so this we kind of, after cleaning up the data, performed an ANOVA and a regression, and I'll show you the actual data in a second. So I'll go through the data and then we can talk about conclusions. This is going to be a little bit messy, but I figured might as well show you what it's like in the trenches. Let's see. Okay. So to start, this is what the raw data looked like, where, you know, they often had things like ranges, a lot of empty, they didn't write attendance. They had names, but there was no standard categories of event types, so we had to kind of guess, educated guesses, or leave it uncategorized. And so we had to clean it up, we had to like make consistent, I think we decided to always use the lower part of the range, so things that, you know, we were able to analyze, and then we had to obviously get rid of things that didn't have attendance data. That was kind of our critical variable. So we were able to clean that up, nice and consistent. Doesn't look clean there, but. So the first part, the first analysis we ran was, you know, does attendance vary by event type? So this is a little bit imperfect, but we kind of found a couple different types of events. Casual, these are events like, let's see, so corporate business, you know, they did a lot of meetings, they did a lot of luncheons. Casual might be things like volunteer appreciation, nonprofit events, barbecues, and then weddings.
Are you trying to delete those?
No, I wasn't. Did I delete it?
Maybe. I thought it was something.
Yeah, one more time. Okay, thank you. That would be open. I think I have a copy somewhere. So this, since this was 3 different groups, we just ran an ANOVA, which tests are these groups different enough, and then we also considered like what is their name.
You know what ANOVA is?
No.
Remember that? Okay. So it's just a way to like, yeah, compare different groups to see if their average is different from each other statistically. So each average, depending on how many data points you have, it's a plus or minus, right? It's some number plus or minus a certain amount. So if there's enough difference between the groups, then it would become significant. Like, hey, the average changes when you go from group to group to group.
Mm-hmm.
So that test is just a statistical test to say whether or not there is differences between the different levels of that, those categories. Whether you can get the statistics to back it up, not just that the average looks a little higher or a little lower.
And so generally I run these in Excel, but there are online tools. You can literally just type ANOVA test online, and you can copy and paste your data into this online tool, and it'll spit out something that's pretty readable. So these are pretty accessible as long as you know what and how to use them. So as long as you remember ANOVA is for testing differences between groups. And so we did show, so like here actually is an example of a readout. We did not actually get a significant difference in testing the group. So the p-value was almost 0.05, but it was close. So it was not statistically significant at the p-value we would like.
Sorry, the groups, you're putting them in what?
Yeah, the groups being casual, business, and wedding. So these are event types. Yeah.
So you're trying to test, so it could not tell a statistical difference between those in terms of attendance percent? Is that
Correct.
right?
Attendance.
So the attendance was, on average, was 87, 94, 96.
Yep.
It said, unless you had more data, that 87 is not, could have been random luck on the sample you pulled. If you had a lot more data, maybe that one would stand out because it was really close to being significant. So there may be something there with a larger data set.
Yep. But it's enough that if I were a caterer, I'd look at that and like, that's a pretty big difference. So weddings are almost perfectly attended. There's some problems here where we averaged attendance, so some attendance was over, and so it's gonna maybe weigh that. It was a little bit of a struggle to figure out how to most appropriately run this analysis, but I think generally, this is a helpful kind of conclusion, that event type does matter. So then we also ran it by date. This one was a little bit less helpful, and I don't even think I have the regression in here. It just wasn't, there's no pattern.
For time of year, basically.
Yeah, for time of year. I think maybe I'd run another ANOVA on season, but it's just, yeah, it was like absolutely random. And then the guests, let's see. So this is by event size. I think this is a little more interesting. I'll show you a different form of that in a moment. So this one, since we have two variables, instead of, I did it just grouping it, but you can also run a regression because we essentially have 200 data points that have both an attendance and a number of guests booked, so event size. The reason that, so actually we'll start with that. I did start with a regression, and we found that it was not significant. So when you run a regression, this is a little bit more complicated, but you want to look at first, is it significant, which is your p-value. Oh, yeah, it was significant. Okay, I misremembered. So you want that to be below 0.05, so it is. But then really the important part is even if that's significant, you want to see how strong the correlation is. So it's a really low R-squared, which means there's no significant change.
So what was it, X variable on this one?
X variable would be the guest booked. So the larger the event on the right, and the percent turnout is the y-axis.
So basically it's saying that there's you can get a couple percentage accuracy improvement if you know how large the event is. You can kind of get a little bit better idea of that, but you want like that 0.03 is 3%, and you want that to be in the 70-80% accuracy to get like a really strong model. So
Yeah.
it says it influences the results, but not that you're going to be able to accurately predict. Because this is like, the line is this is the fluctuation around that line, so it's not very, it's not going to be a really useful predictor at that point.
Right. Which is a bummer. It would have been nice to have a nice regression. And it depends. I mean, in hard sciences and manufacturing, for example, you want a 0.7, 0.8. But in things that especially involve human behavior, if you find a 0.3 or 0.4 R-squared, that's pretty good. And I would be comfortable acting on that, depending on the outcome. But I thought, okay, so the regression isn't giving me a lot, but like, you can kind of see that like there's a lot more underattended events as you have smaller events. And part of it is obviously we didn't have a lot of data up here. So even when I reran it to get rid of some outliers, the regression wasn't very strong. It was actually worse. So, but then I decided to run by groups just because it seemed to me like there was such a big difference that it could be helpful. And again, I think it really just was we needed more data in a range. So this actually, when I grouped it, events smaller than 50, events between 50 and 200, and events larger than 200, there was a statistically significant difference among the groups. Again, the idea here being is that the average is closer to 100 with smaller events. Problem there is, as you can see here, there's just a lot of over and under, so they average out at 100. So not necessarily ideal. So what's a
lot of fluctuation of small events.
Yeah. Which I think is helpful for them to act on, right? It's a little bit like, well, it's inconclusive, but it's like, well, not necessarily. It means that if you have large events, it's near impossible for them to be overattended. Like the data is just showing you rarely are overattended, and I think that's why breaking it out here is more helpful. So for large events, only 8% were overattended, and so their practice is to almost always bring extra, but you're bringing extra every time for 8% of events. And is there a better strategy? Can we just make sure we're bringing, prepackaged like meals? Can you have an option to just bring an extra that doesn't expire or that is more likely to be reusable? And I think that's pretty much across the board, right? So even for medium-sized events, only 12% are over-attended, and for small events, only 18% are over-attended. So really that fear isn't entirely rational, and I think that we need to be constructing our systems better to make sure we're not wasting 100% of the time. Which, that's where this kind of qualitative analysis, when we looked at their notes, which again, aren't that helpful because they're not, they weren't always included. But out of the 200 some events, I think about a half, and I don't have the numbers in, I don't think, but about a half had notes, and only, here we go. Yeah, so about half had notes that indicated leftovers, and or any sort of acknowledgement of food quantity. But where is it here?
So that's based on whether there's a note about the
Right.
leftovers, okay.
Right, so, you know, it's, did they have any leftovers? And I think the interesting part is here, again, so we can't assume that if it didn't have a note, that it didn't have leftovers. It's likely that they just didn't write it down all the time. But I think the interesting thing is, even for events that were over-attended, 30% of them still had a note that they had leftovers. So even in the worst case scenario, too many people, you're still having leftovers. And that goes up to about 50% at events that were under-attended. So I think the point there being, leftovers happen all the time, kind of regardless of attendance. And so we have a problem. So, okay, well, what does that mean? What next?
By the way, the data cleaning up, and that looks exactly like stuff I see. I mean, step one is like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, at least it's something. We're getting started here. And then over time, you can refine it and say, okay, now going forward, can you guys record it in this format? Can you use
Yeah.
these drop downs? Can you start getting better and better data? The model starts to get a little more clear. The R squared goes from 3% to 12%, and then
Yeah.
28%, and then you got something useful, but maybe it's the fourth iteration of data collection and working with the teams before you actually start getting something really powerful and useful.
Yep. Yeah, to that point, that's exactly it. I do have a question.
Yeah, I did. Did you look at sales, like the cost of the event too? Was that considered?
No, because it wasn't, it would have been on a different form, which I think we could have done, but we didn't
Oh, okay.
record financial information.
Oh, okay, I just wonder, after working for a lot of caterers, I just wonder if the more expensive events have more weight, does that, I mean, there's upselling constantly, that's like
Yeah.
what they're in the business to do.
I'm sure, and I would assume
So-
that some mostly tracks with attendance,
Mhm.
but I mean, some events are just like you're catering a snack, and then some are like
A
three-course
full
meal.
day, yeah.
Right, so it's really hard to, yeah.
Very interesting.
How many years worth
We only did 2.
in those logs that you had?
Mhm. Yeah, and this is a medium to small size caterer. So, and I think, you know, we encourage them, could you kind of, like Brian was talking about, can we reform our data practices so that, you know, you don't have stacks? And of course, they're not gonna go back and do that. I mean, this took us a lot of hours, and it's totally reasonable that they wouldn't do that. But we did try to develop a tool to do just what Brian was saying. So, one, so that we had, you know, drop down, give us the type of your event, so they're standard, and it makes for easier analysis. Guest book, guest attended, and this, I mean, if I were deploying this as a caterer, I'd go on and I'd put, was there alcohol at the event? Because we heard that really impacts how much people eat. You know, was there kind of extreme weather? Or kind of disqualifier, so that when you analyze the data for leftovers, you're really kind of looking at a normal event, and that's what you need to generally plan for. So the nice thing about this is, you know, this would take people 30 seconds to come and enter after their event. But the tool here, as I have it now, would automatically analyze kind of how much waste occurred. This tool is built so that they can actually enter in their leftovers by food type. And so then this would be a helpful par planning tool, so like their production numbers. You know, they would see, okay, well, are we consistently overproducing our chicken because we're planning 4 ounces per guest, and we actually need 3. So this would be, you know, this could be built out, but they didn't want to do it, unfortunately.
Is this a tool you'd be willing to share?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and
They said they wouldn't be
yeah,
interested in that.
yeah. And I mean, they've been in the business for 30 years. I think it's just like, there's a lot of kind of hubris around, we know what we're doing, and I don't need a tool to tell me how much chicken people eat. So,
Yeah, I just want,
Yeah,
I
if you
mean, the
can turn it
impetus
into
for them
dollars.
to care about the waste,
Mhm.
if people are paying, I don't know, it's just an interesting, for a catering company specifically, it's an interesting conundrum, I think.
mhm.
But to that point too is, they think they're doing well, but there's no data to tell them they're not doing well
Mhm.
either.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of the start to say, here's the feedback loop,
Yep.
and oh crap, I'm not as good as I thought I was.
Mhm.
And eventually there's that change management that kicks in and like, okay, I'm ready to listen.
Mhm.
After a couple events where I thought had it dialed in and I was wrong again, okay.
From
So
the
yeah,
catering
that's,
side, though,
takes
they-
time.
that somebody pays them for the waste.
That's the other thing, yeah, they're not incentivized.
So, yeah, okay, we're making way too much food, but we get paid for that, and that's how we make a living,
Yeah.
so why would we, I don't need a van collection.
Right, it's built in, it's really the guests that are paying for it, it's their client that pays for it.
Right.
So we kind of talked or explored in the case study, you know, especially in Portland, in a market that is environmentally conscious, could there be, I think right now green catering only looks around diversion, it has nothing to do with waste reduction. And so I would envision that there could be a middle ground, which is, you know, this is green catering as it should be, which is you give me a guest count, and we will bring food only for that guest count. And we will bring, you know, maybe we bring a certain type of food. It might be different than the menu, but that we can keep and last for a few weeks in our fridge. So like, there can be a deployable emergency, but as a client, I'm signing up for that. And okay, that makes sense. I had extra guests, they can eat, you know, something else. But that way, it's a hard cap instead of everyone's over planning. So I would love to see that, but I don't, that's.
Radical.
It's doable.
I think it is doable. I think it is.
yeah.
I think it's just a change of practice. And I think part of that is people don't, I think we're still getting around to like, oh, it's the food waste, that's a problem. It's not the packaging, you know? That's where the impact is. And I think as that consciousness builds, people might be more aware of it.
And for us to ask that question when we're picking caterers, you know, it's like, what do you do? How do you manage your food?
Yeah. So we can talk, I can open up to questions about this, and then if we want, and we have time, I can go into the retail cafe, because another interesting example. If any other questions about this? Okay.
Yeah, stick with them.
Cool. Might as well, it's pretty
Yeah.
quick.
Okay.
So this retail cafe, they have quite a few locations in Portland, regional, and we were specifically focusing on bakery waste. So they had kind of an in-house commissary style where they would get frozen baked goods from their commissary bakery and then they'd bake them on site. Mostly with oversight from the head baker on site. But the corporate policy was quite literally, you need to overproduce 20%. You need to make sure that your shelves are full, pretty full until the end of the day. And so their target was, let's always shoot for 20% over. I'm like, oh, wow, okay.
So
Well,
this is like so I could go into a shop like this and go to a display case and they're saying that near the end of the day, it's full of baked
yeah,
goods.
they still want product on the shelves, which sounded like it was actually a pretty recent shift. This organization used to be a little more, I think, less strict and less kind of standardized, and so this is a recent shift to now being no, we can't run out. We need to keep, which I think I've heard is pretty common among.
They give you a reason why they shifted?
I think it was, so we weren't able to actually talk with kind of corporate leaders.
Oh, yeah.
It was very much a site-based case study, and their interpretation was they just didn't want to lose customers because their favorite product was out. But so we're like, well, that's interesting. So kind of a couple key questions was, is that 20%? Does that actually mean they're wasting 20%? And is it necessary? Like, is it necessary to overproduce across the board to make sure product is left on the shelf?
I almost feel like when you go to these places and there's so much of it, you think, oh, that can't be very good. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
oh, there's only 2 of those left. I might want one of those.
No, I
You
think
flip that on its head.
Well,
Yeah.
and then other places like Blue Star, they intentionally produce to run out
yeah,
daily.
scarcity
So,
is a trap.
yeah.
Mhm.
They don't want leftover anything, so there's the other side of that as well,
Yeah.
as a business case.
Right. And so part of this was too, can we quantify the impact and is that convincing enough? And so an overall takeaway was this single location is wasting $10,000 in food costs alone. That has nothing to do with labor. I mean, this is baked goods are highly labor intensive.
But they're actually spending more time making the extra 20%
Yeah.
than I'm assuming it might take 4 batches instead of 3, so that extra 4th batch is labor.
Yep, there's labor, and then on-site is it baking. Not only
Wait, sorry, the
on-site,
10K doesn't include labor?
does not include labor.
Oh my gosh.
There wasn't a good way for us to measure labor, partly because it's both on-site and the commissary. And there's just not, as far as we know, there's not a lot of good labor, like standard assumptions for labor
Yeah.
costs.
That was just the 10,000 was just the,
Pure food costs.
Wow.
And that was estimated, and there's 30 products, so we kind of had to use an estimate for,
yeah.
yeah. It was just, it's probably low, because we had to use kind of national estimates for butter and grain. So we started with just these weekly production logs, which they've been collecting forever, and they're really just used currently by the head baker to look week over week. And so, you know, there's an extent at which they're trying to do some kind of dynamic par setting, production setting. It's like, well, last week I didn't need this, or on a Thursday I didn't need this. But I think really just kind of supported their intuition. As we can see here, this is I know it's really small. This is a graph just by day of the week, so kind of grouping. And so you can kind of see that I think even though they have this tool to kind of theoretically adjust day to day, week to week, what it really meant was, you know, their Saturday pars are pretty similar every Saturday. Their Monday pars are pretty similar every Monday. The reason I actually threw this in there was we had this weird anomaly where this one Friday had production like 20% higher. That was actually 420. So they had a weird sale where they upped their production of brownies by like 200%. They sold all the brownies, but they didn't sell everything else. So it actually had a huge waste too. So for the actual analysis, we excluded that as an outlier, but it's kind of a funny anecdote. And I think really important, which is like specials are oftentimes not a really, you know, very wasteful. And there's actually a lot of research showing that specials can cause a lot of demand change, and that struggling to plan for that actually leads to more waste. So,
Yeah, actually winning in the long run. Like,
Yeah.
Do you have anything to
gaining
show for
sales.
sales on that day?
no, we didn't get sales. So this is all the data we had. Yeah, so we ran, because this was so time intensive to digitize this, we just did a month of data, so like 28 days. And let's see that data. So this is what it looked like this is the raw stuff. So this was a little bit crazy of analysis to try to pull all of this. But once we got it into our products, and actually that was just, yeah. So here's all of our products per day. Super fun. And this is where, I think a takeaway from this is, you should have a POS system that does this. You should have a POS system that actually allows you to look at a product and see over time. And the 3 or 4 businesses we tried to work with them on this, their POS system just didn't have that function. So it's part of the problem is that the software isn't where we need it to be, for no good reason. It's just, and I don't know, people haven't felt a need for that, but I really think what we see here is a high variance by product in sales and waste, and so we need to have that granularity.
A lot of times, so much effort's put into getting the data to be collected
Yeah.
or entered and up and running, and they don't plan, or they run out of money or something to build the reports on the back end to do something with the data. So.
Yeah. So this is messy, but really the point to be made here is we sorted here. We actually recorded how many times does the product sell out completely, and then how many of those product or items goes unsold. So this is totals over the month. And really we see like a high variation from the most sold out product, which sold out about half the time, to the least, which sold out one day. And so kind of the point was that 20% is a really kind of crude way to plan for our production. And when really, you know, we have quite a few products, in fact over half, that are only selling out a fourth of the time. And they end up making up 1,700 wasted items, baked items in a month. And so, you know, it's really like, we can keep some of these pars the same. If you're really worried about availability, you could keep the top half, the top 15 products the same, and reduce the pars on the bottom, and you would still not run out. And so it's really just showing, I think a granular look does support waste reduction. So, of course, we kind of got chewed out of this case study, actually. We couldn't really go through this and work with this data to test any practices. We lost the manager there, and we kind of just had to leave with the data and do our own thing. So this was unfortunate, but I just want to go back as a consultant and be like, let me help you. Yeah, and imagine doing this. I mean, so this is a single site over a month, but every one of their sites collects this data, and it would be fascinating to see, but I really think there's a lot of potential here. So we also looked, okay, day of the week, so is it that some of their daily pars are off? Are they always overproducing on a Saturday? We couldn't run an ANOVA because there's only 4 of each day, and we could, but it's not really the tool works better with more data. So we really just had to do, look at the averages. And there's not like huge differences, except that, Friday they're not selling 28% of their product, whereas Mondays there's, not selling 15%. So there's some there. I think you probably want a little more than a month of data there to make conclusions, but shows there might be some value to looking at your pars daily and adjusting. I think it's also a conversation is, at most, so here, this is by day, at most you sold out of 46% of your product. So like, okay, that was a busy day. Is that the end of the world? Where some days you're only selling out 13% of your product. And I think it begs a conversation of what, maybe this should be more of our target than just outright overproduce 20%. Because I think
they're hoping that's 0?
I don't know. We didn't hear an articulated policy.
Okay.
I would hope that wouldn't be the goal. I think that's ridiculous.
Never selling out of any product, okay.
Yeah.
So if you took that as data and did a coefficient of variation, you just looked at which
Which
ones,
varies by the total numbering,
like what's the degree of variation in each product? Something
Oh yeah. Mhm.
doesn't vary much,
Right.
just find out that,
No, totally. Yeah. So like essentially a standard deviation.
oh yeah, so we're like a smaller standard deviation,
Yeah.
you're saying is more consistent and more predictable?
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I actually didn't run that. That would be that's a really good idea.
So with the bigger variation, those are the ones you have to watch and make 20% over. The other ones you only have to do,
Mhm.
standard deviation 5%.
Yeah, we got the same 10 customers that
Yeah.
come in every day. And
So
they
you
do
can
the same
assign a
thing.
number to it, and then you go, the lowest numbers, don't worry about it, they're not gonna move much for the other ones.
Yeah, and that would be interesting. I mean, the part of the problem is since they have routine pars, like for this product, 36 was the norm, and so it was very infrequent that you would see that change. But if you ran it on waste, it might be more helpful, or essentially a production minus waste to be like actual, or that's where it'd be nice if we had sales data for a product. You could run deviation on sales, and we knew exactly what the demand is. But we can't do that.
How did you get this data? Was
So
that
this,
done?
we literally just took pictures of their bakery record sheets. So it was
Okay,
the head
that's their
bakers.
manual sheets,
Yeah.
even though they have a POS system.
Even though they have a POS
Wow.
system, we could not, the POS system would not look at the product level over time. Yeah, so we could, in another case study, we did end up pulling that data, and I had to make an Excel tool to manually pull product level data and aggregate over time, which was ridiculous, and could be theoretically used, if it was tinkered, it might be able to be used as a tool for other people. Where I got it, where you could just copy and paste the sales report into the file and automatically run it, but it's just a really, again, crude tool if your POS system should be doing that. So anyways, okay. Yep. So sorry
That's
to get into
pretty typical too, that even the best system is not gonna be sufficient probably to solve your problem. There's always some lower level of data you need, whether it's done manually, but that's frustrating when even the stuff that should be captured, you're not getting into the nitty gritty, okay, what happened on that day, and little patterns like that. That's where a lot of the detailed data collection might be needed, but yeah, that's frustrating to see that high level data isn't even there,
Yeah.
even with electronic system.
Right, you can see they can pull daily averages and that's fine, but as far as trends in product sales, it's down. Okay, so yeah, conclusions were pretty much, there is an opportunity for targeted power reduction without compromising availability, and there's definitely variation in day of the week waste. And really, they should, I think they're already talking about upgrading the POS to give them more opportunity for reporting. And then really, if they, avoiding that, I think there's questions of should they be entering this data? I might argue it's worth it, even if it's like, not as frequent, it doesn't need to be an all the time thing, but it's kind of a check-in on your PARs. And then I think there's a lot of room to like quantify labor impact. And I think that's what would be needed to move the needle on this. So, yeah,
Cool.
any questions on that?
What did they make of your conclusions?
What?
What did they make of your conclusions?
Well, again, so they kind of showed up. We weren't able to take this to their
Oh, right,
corporate level. Yeah. Which is unfortunate. I'm not, I don't know if that's, so what is typical in our case studies, of the 13, at 6 we lost our point contacts over the 8 months because they were fired, quit, moved on. So super volatile industry. Yeah.
I see this, you guys probably have.
Yes.
I saw that come out around Thanksgiving to try to figure out how much food you should make based on how many guests you have, and so they broke it down by small eaters, average eaters, big eaters, total guests, and then I think if you wanted to have leftovers, they were trying to build this tool in, so then they were trying to break it out into different things, and you can customize that a little bit, but kind of at the heart of this tool is there's some kind of model that they've developed or came up with that kind of looked at, okay, for a typical meal with these types of appetites and this type of people, the idea is that you're plugging in these things into an equation, which is basically he mentioned regression and ANOVA. Those spit out an equation. And if you have a strong model, like a high R squared they talked about, then that equation is going to be pretty good predictor of what you'll need. And so that's basically what's going on in the background is there's an equation that basically uses these numbers and spits out an answer based on that. And so when I saw this tool, I was basically saying there's a statistical model in the background that's been generated to kind of come up with this. Now I don't know how accurate that number is going to be. There's a plus or minus on that, right? So is it actually 1.5 cups? Well, maybe not exactly. Maybe there's half a cup variation on that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Simplification of a tool where someone's taken some of the details and simplified it into a useful tool for people to actually use. And I think that's what Reed was talking about too, a simple Excel file with a simple reports on the back end for people who aren't going to sit down and go through all the details and the numbers. So you can check that out on your next meal planning.
I wonder how accurate that is, and
Yeah,
do we know about it?
I didn't look at the details, like what the margin error or the variation was around that, but
There's pretty basic industry standards for food serving size from catering and restaurant and things, so I'm
so
sure
maybe they
that's-
compiled it from those, or maybe they had a separate data that they were tracking.
Yeah.
Not sure of the source. I'm sure it's listed somewhere how they came up with that.
And there you go with the analyze, verify the data thing. Could be some kid going, man, I like turkey, we put a lot on there.
Yeah.
That's how they get their
It is,
formula.
yeah.
Where do you get it?
And those numbers would obviously change if you're doing a plated meal versus a buffet style.
Buffet, yep.
And so then you can keep that down by serving utensil sizes, plate sizes,
Yes.
things like that,
Right.
in different ways, if you were doing buffet versus plated.
Yeah,
If you're doing
sure,
plated, then you can say, yeah, you get a cup and a half of this,
Mhm.
when we're out.
There you go.
So,
man.
yeah.
Yeah, and as you were listening to Reed, I'm sure there's a lot of like variables that popped in your head, like, I wonder if they thought about this, or they have this data. And that's, this evolution of this analysis is basically, you go in there and you get more data. And then you look at the model and say, well, that data point's funny, what happened? Oh, that's 420, or that's after the Blazers game, or that was Timbers won, or Timbers lost. You know, like all these different things come into play, and then you start continuing to build your model over time. And so it gets better and better, but it also eventually gets, there's quite a bit of work to build up the data set too. But it gets more refined and it gets more accurate. And then your model is, okay, we start with this, and then there's a series of 8 to 10 yes/no questions that say, is it raining tomorrow? Is it going to be less than 40 degrees? Yes or no? Is there is the PSU in session right now? Like, and then that starts to refine and tweak the model to get more and more accurate. And that's just something you'll continue to build over time. So iteration 1 is, I got these sheets of paper. Iteration 2 is someone took the time, put it into a spreadsheet. Iteration 3 is, now let's clean up the data. Then the 4th version, let's get the data coming in clean. And then 5 is, okay, that gives us a weak model. Version 5 is adding more columns. Version 6 is adding a few more columns, and then it eventually becomes very useful. But it's not, I've never had it go in like I pulled a set of data and it's like, oh, here's your answer, and it's all the data's right there. So it's just an iteration, and it takes time, a little bit of work over time. But usually, pretty quickly, with you get into that 3rd or 4th iteration, you can start to find problem areas and start making an impact. It's later when you get into, like, you've gotten the easy stuff out of the way, now you're trying to refine it and tweak it. So you'll start to see some gains already with just, I mean, even what he showed there was, I'd say, pretty rough data that they were seeing some opportunity there. So that's pretty typical. And then the last thing I'm just talking about, so this whole Six Sigma training, this is the training material for like a green belt, black belt course, specifically around some of these statistical tools. So we mentioned like ANOVA, regression. There's also experiments, setting up a formal experiment. That's all covered kind of like in a green belt 2-week course. And then the black belt kind of enhances a lot of these other tools. So like I said, if you have taken statistics before, you might have heard or seen some of these terms before. But that's a heavy part of that Six Sigma training. So once you get past kind of the process maps and Pareto charts and some simple things, it can get very complex very quickly. I don't think that's necessary for people. I think some of these tools are pretty helpful, like the top half, and then just some knowledge of some of the statistical tools, like you mentioned p-values and knowing what those are, that's helpful, but usually it's good to at least have a resource you can go to that has some of the more statistics background. I don't know if Reed was doing all that himself or had some people he's working with, but he said he took some classes in college. He's pretty young, so maybe he still remembers a lot of that. But that's, in Six Sigma, they get into a lot of the details around that statistics, so. Just FYI, if you do like that stuff, there's a lot of that in the Six Sigma training world. So, there's really not a shortage of ideas. Sometimes we've tried things in the past, but it's, maybe didn't have the support or didn't have the details, or it wasn't done very well, or wasn't rolled out very well, or it wasn't deployed in a way that people embraced. Maybe it was kind of imposed on people or forced on people and they fought back on it. So there's lots of reasons why good ideas don't necessarily work out. But the other thing you want to think about is you might end up with a situation where you have so many ideas and not sure where to start. So I like to think about the ideas in this type of a matrix in terms of effort and impact. So how much effort is this going to be, and what actually will this result in? And if I don't see that this is not a huge amount of effort and it's not going to lead to some decent improvements there, then should we really be doing that? So if it's low effort in this area plus high impact, those are good potential project ideas or improvement ideas. And these would represent different ideas, different numbers. Whereas something over here with a high amount of effort, but not going to get you much benefit there, we should really question whether that's a good approach. So I'll use it as an initial kind of screening on ideas to try to whittle them out. There's really good discussion about impact and effort that goes along with that too. What seems like something simple and someone says, no, that's actually a lot of work. You gotta do this and this and this and this. And that's like, at least everyone gets on the same page with, yeah, this isn't something that's gonna be done next week. It's gonna take time. So I don't know if you guys have used something like that or a tool like that to prioritize or at least kind of whittle down some of the not so good ideas, and not in a bad way, but just kind of say, I just don't think that's going to get us the impact we need. So you're not shooting down their ideas, but you're just putting it in perspective. And this would be like a team effort to try to figure out where these should fit into the matrix. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, or you start having trouble coming to some agreement or consensus, you can do some kind of multi-voting or some kind of scoring system. So I had a class the other day that we had to decide where we're gonna eat at, and the class is over in Lloyd Center, so they didn't agree on where to eat, so I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity to teach you a little tool. So there were 6 options for where to eat, and then we had 6 people in class. It just worked out that way, but it doesn't matter how many people you have and how many options you have. You just give everyone a ranking, and they pick it and say, okay, my number 1 choice gets a 1, and my least favorite choice gets a 6. So the one with the lowest total points is the highest option, favorite option, yeah. And you can do it the other way too if you want, but so when you lay it out this way, then we have a ranking of options, and you could see, let's say that we picked Thai for some reason, but there's a lot of 2s, so okay, it wasn't my number 1 choice, but it was one of my top choices. So at the end of the day, the buy-in on the solution that you go forward with is much higher because it wasn't an all or nothing decision for everybody. Everyone got input on it, they got to put it in some kind of rank order, and then overall they can kind of buy in that, okay, even though I was in the minority, I don't know if there's anyone that was, we had a really good separation here because there's just 2 options. And then the second day, I think we ordered out for the Thai. But if there was someone with a 1 down here, hopefully their 2 or 3 would have been up in one of the top choices. So again, it's kind of like it's a little bit like a consolation prize. And so instead you could use these as improvement ideas, and then you rank it with the team members. And you can make up kind of any kind of matrix you want there, but it's just a way to bring some objective tool to the team to take something that's a little bit subjective, and sometimes it's really hard to, get a perfect solution to something. So you're using some structure and a tool to kind of move the team forward and make a decision and get moving forward. Because you can get bogged down on these types of things way longer than you need to. I try to do this blind too, because you don't want people to because I was going to have people write up, and I was like, no, because they'll see like my results are going to be affected by what someone else is writing. I don't want to be the one only putting the 1 here. No one else is doing that. Maybe I'll change my vote. So we had to just have them write it on a sheet of paper, and then I tallied it up afterwards. But you could do this I did something like this for selecting a home to purchase. So on the left was homes, and then on the top was criteria of the home. So size of house, square footage, price is on there, yeah. Distance to work. This is in Florida, so I'm trying to remember the different things. Think pool, yes or no. But then you can also weight this, get even more complex with it, and say this is really, really important that it has 2 his and her bathroom sinks. So I'm going to weight that at 20%, and then you could adjust it that way. So this is purely assuming everyone's equal on that, but you could have different criteria there. So there's lots of flexibility in how you can use a tool like that, but it's just really kind of a prioritization matrix. Has anyone done anything or had any examples like that? Used it?
I use the 9-block thing all the time.
9 block?
Yeah. So
The
we'll just go through and do the whole shop, and then do a 9-block it,
can you explain the 9 block?
like the 4-block we had before.
You just had another
Yeah.
category in between, low, medium, high,
Yeah.
or something like. Okay, all right.
Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's
Yep.
like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay.
Spread it out a little more,
Yeah.
and then we just take the top corner
Okay.
and work on those things.
Cool. Yeah, also great for just low-hanging opportunities. You just throw them up there. Oh, let's go tackle that first, or these 3, and then let's get some momentum, and then we'll step back and look at better data, get deeper into this a little bit. But we want to see some quick successes. That's a good way to do it too. You can pick a spouse this way. You can put their names on the side and things you like about them. Any questions about that?
But the whole point is you're getting multiple people voting though.
And they're getting multiple inputs
Yeah.
into it, so hopefully one of their top choices will end up being the answer, and they can, because what you want is you want the team to be bought into the outcome and be supportive of it, not say, That team, I don't know what they're doing over there. They're going down this path and I'm not really on board. And then you get dissension and people are talking outside the meetings and stuff. So you're trying to build concurrence. Oh, that's not the right word. You're just trying to get everyone aligned. Consensus. Yeah, but it doesn't have to be my top choice, but I can support it. And I'm going to go forward and say, this is what we're doing, and be strong about it, and say, you know, show confidence, and not be saying, well, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Geez, that's not what my choice was. You can't really have that when you're trying to change behaviors and get people to do something different. So, yeah, it's trying to just speed through that process a little faster, and maybe there's problems in here that can lead to good discussions. Why do we have a bunch of people picking this as one and the other one? What do you like about this? What don't you like about that? Maybe people are confused and we need to rescore it actually after a little bit of discussion. It's like, oh no, I thought what you guys meant by that was this and this and this. I didn't know that included that or didn't include that. So there could be, you know, some good discussion after the first ranking, and you might go back and rescore it a second time now that you have more clarity. So. But just to kind of say, oh, no one's complaining, we're gonna go down this path, and then you find out later that people didn't like it or they didn't feel comfortable saying something. This kind of gets it on the table. And we wouldn't necessarily put names on here. Picking lunch, I didn't really think that was risky, but I think I even put their names up there. You could do it anonymous, so people aren't worried about being called out or afraid of their scores or something. One of the other techniques that's really gaining popularity is called Lean Startup. Has anyone read that book or heard of that? Mm-hmm. So it's they took a lot of the principles of Lean, and there's been a lot of work being done to try to better roll out new products and services. So the history kind of came out of software development, app development, and what they're finding is people are spending a lot of time on stuff that they would develop they think is really cool or might be needed, and then they're hunting around looking for customers and realizing that there weren't customers, or what they presented to the customer wasn't what they expected or wanted. So there's just a lot of inefficiency and waste in that, and it would, you know, put companies out of business if you do it wrong, right? You raise money, millions of dollars to develop this really cool website or app or something, and then you go present it and the customer says, I don't like this, you need to change on this stuff, and you're like, well, we don't have any more money, so they try to force it on the customers. Or they go out of business and try something else. So it's very risky when you don't know how things are going to roll out. You try to get down to as simple and as minimal of a product to offer to them as possible, and get instant feedback and continual feedback from a small group of potential customers. And you work through that on a very small scale until you get something where they're happy with it and they want more features at that point. So it's kind of like just-in-time development. Whereas a lot of companies are built around like huge, major things where you define the requirements up front, and then you make it to those requirements. But usually the customer's not happy at the end because they took a guess at a lot of those requirements. They didn't really know it until they got in front of them, and then they see the final product or service, and they're like, that's not what I really wanted. Even though I know that's what I told you, I didn't even know what I needed. So you present it in front of them. So some of the things is like someone will make a cardboard cutout, and it'll have like paper rolls, and when you swipe, it actually just moves the piece of paper over, and then here's the next screen. Is this what you kind of were thinking it would do? No, when I press this button, I expect it to go to my profile, not to go to the next page. Like, okay, we can change it very easily because we haven't developed anything. Or they'll make like screens, and then it's like, you click this and it doesn't actually do any functionality. It goes to another pre-made screen. And you can say, does that look right? There's nothing behind the scenes that have been developed, but it's all kind of laid out in a way that's very simple. And it's trying to get them to experience and work with the product or the service before you invest a lot of time into doing it. And then you start to get better clarity about what your customer actually wants, and find out, will they actually use it? And if not, then cool, go do something else. But maybe that discussion, you'll find out that, hey, this is what we really need help on. Can you do something around this? And you can change before you've wasted a lot of money and effort. So that's a little bit of history of that, and they go through this build, measure, learn process. And that build is trying to be just as simple as possible for where you're at. Get feedback, go to your customer on a very frequent basis. Sometimes people will say, oh, I talked to this customer, they want this, and they go away for months and they come back with a final product and it's not what they want. Whereas they'd rather, the better process is to meet with them every other week and show them how you're progressing and what you've done and do they like it. And every step of the way, you have a chance to adjust and modify. And then whatever you learn from that, you go back to, and that's part of your next iteration of that. So it's making things into smaller batches of work. Instead of saying, I'm going to build out this full functionality, I'm just going to add this one piece and then show it to them and see what they like. And then add the next piece and show it to them and get that feedback. So small batches like that. So you get quicker feedback, you actually building excitement from your customer base. Some will actually start to pay out money ahead, says, I want to be the first to get it, or you give it to them at a reduced cost because you know it's in a beta version or it's not fully fleshed out. Your costs are low, you're putting your money in the right spot. And so, we've got, nope. So when we were working on our coffee cup campaign, that was part of it, is we had very little funding, and so our team was ready to go like print up a bunch of materials, and I was just like, if you're wrong about these materials, we've blown our whole budget. So how about we like just print on our printer something we like and then go talk to the coffee shops and say, is this something you would actually put up in your store window or at your cash register? And after we got there, then we had someone actually do some graphic design to make it look nicer, and we actually went to an official print house and got things printed more professionally looking. But because otherwise it would have been really risky to just say, this is what we think the coffee shops want, and then find out they don't like it, and then we're like, well, now there's nothing we can do. Now we got waste of a bunch of printed materials, and we're no further along, and now we have to go raise more money or find more money to go do that. So
Yeah.
that was the approach on this Bring Your Own Cup campaign. I kind of thought of those principles. The other thing was we just had a zero waste conference. And that was the same question is, will anyone show up to this? Do we want to put a lot of effort if we get no signups? And so we started with surveys and said, what topics would you like to see? What would you like to learn about? Would you actually attend? When would you like to attend? What kind of, do you want to come on the weekend or weekday? Would you come for 4 hours or one whole day or multiple days? Try to get at least some input and say, would people actually fill out the survey? If they can't get people to fill out the survey, they're probably not going to show up to an event. And if they do fill out the survey, then what are they telling us? And how do we just customize the conference to that? So we got good feedback on the survey, 100 some responses. And then they spelled out basically 4 hours on the weekend. And these are the top topics that they kept seeing over and over again. We gave them like a list of potential topics and they picked those. So it was pretty easy after that. You just say, who can talk about this, who can talk about this, and send this out to the people who filled out the survey, and we got really good enrollment to it. So before we wasted a bunch of time trying to guess at that, we just kind of let the customers dictate where we're going. And so that lean startup approach is really gaining a lot of traction because of that. But it's a lot talked about in terms of like development of software, but there's also a book that came out right after that. So this is the book Lean Startup. That gives you the overall premise, and he talks about his work at a software development company. And then Michael Galopter talks about how you can apply this to nonprofit work and government agencies to do this very similar thing, except that you have, instead of in the for-profit world when you're going to find a customer, in the government agencies and the nonprofits, you're going to serve residents or people in need, and they're not necessarily the one paying for it. So you have to convince another group to do this for that target audience that they're trying to serve and help. And so it's a little bit different thought process, but a lot of the same concepts apply there. So that's a good one too. He kind of assumes you have a little bit of background on this first. So I would probably check this one out and then reference this one next. And then after his success with this, he went to GE and deployed this at a major corporation and had a lot of success. So this is what the third book is around, how to deploy this in a non-software development company that's small and tech-based. It was a company like making, huge transformer systems. They make 6 of them a year. It's like, oh, that won't work here. It's like, no, actually, a lot of it will work. And so he talks through examples there. So yeah, that's really gaining a lot of momentum. And those are the reference books for that. But just the idea of just kind of thinking through, how can we test this out on a small scale before we throw a lot of effort into this? How do we get some feedback, see if it's going to work? And a lot of the lean concepts we talk about is small experiments and getting that feedback, and then changing course if it's not going the way you thought it would. But oftentimes we are surprised at the results we get. Sometimes it works better than we think, and sometimes it doesn't go as well as we think, but that's why we need to test it and not throw a bunch of effort at it and find out it didn't work later. Any questions about that? Any examples you can think of where it might have helped in the past? Maybe something got rolled out that was not very successful, could have been done or tested out in a simpler way to find out that wasn't going to work earlier.
Well, like the rebuilding center, making the cardboard cutouts of everything we're doing. Let's make we made little things on the table where we figured out we wanted the counter over there and the checkout over here and different things like that. And so we built little tables and little checkouts and stuff, and we built this little model. And we had everybody that actually worked there looking at it and thinking, okay, well, if you're walking down here, what can you see? Well, you can't really see past, you can't see down the aisle to see if people are stealing stuff or if somebody's waiting to need help or something, so we have to move this over. So that was kind of a neat little thing. Instead of moving everything, going, oh, great, we can't see. Do it on a smaller scale. Move things around. And then we did like the voting on that. Yeah. Then we did the voting.
That's not the exact one, but there was a couple of that were like.
Yeah. Like
Here.
that.
Yeah, the little cutouts and
Rearranging.
And then everybody brought theirs, we had different groups working on theirs, what they thought, and then we brought them together. We were like, okay, what do you guys think about this? What do you think about that? And then we voted on, okay, well, I think there should be room behind the counter. There should be a counter, then the space and the wall, and you should be able to get out there. We all agreed on that.
There's another video I've seen of like a hospital that actually made everything to scale out of cardboard. So they built like desks and tables and phones, and it's all cardboard.
Yeah.
But then it's like spatially they could actually walk in the area, and they're like, "Whoa, wait, that's too narrow right here." Like,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. I thought it was
The receptionist
fine.
was sitting there, and she said, well, I can't see the front door.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's, oh, well, we gotta open
Yeah.
this up.
When you were coming to making those decisions and it wasn't a unanimous vote, how did you please everyone?
Just talked it out. A lot of it was like, okay, well, let's go see.
Yeah.
I'm a big one for go see. Ask why, show the words back. It's their space. You know what I mean? So we go out there and see. Well, okay, well, if you're standing here, he says if we're standing here, there's not enough room between the counter and there to walk. So why don't we get back here, walk back and forth?
Yeah. Or
Actually
you can't
try
see
to
the
work
front.
it
Well,
out.
where would you have to be standing so you could see the
Yeah.
front? Oh, right here. Okay, we'll mark that off. That's 6 feet from the wall. Okay, let's make sure that's nothing is in that space or something. Yeah.
My brother works for Boeing, and they have plane, like a few, and they'll bring potential clients in to look at it, and then if they want something moved around, they have styrofoam panels that they can hot knife and cut right then and there to mock it up.
Yep.
And then they'll be like, oh no, this is too narrow, so they'll cut off a few inches and be like, well, what about now? And then they go through that, and so they'll just keep going until this whole plane is mocked up with styrofoam.
Yeah.
And then they know like what it is, and they're like, okay, perfect.
And I just
We're
make
building you this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's
It's a lot less cost. than-
Visual, yeah, huge cost.
Yeah,
Especially
it's-
aerospace, you can't change stuff very easily. It's a behemoth and huge cost.
I wonder
Oh,
how we could do.
you added a screw, we gotta recertify the plane now, and
For
that's
sure,
$100 million or, I don't know, lots of money.
I wonder how we use that in, reducing food waste.
Yeah, that's a good question.
How could we use that?
What about like what Reed was suggesting, and, or maybe some of the stuff at Embassy, like, is there a smaller, could you pilot it in some area, or test it on a small scale, or try it with one day, you know, we're gonna try it this way?
Right, like bringing the, you know, you plan for X amount of people and then have your old stash of prefab stuff that could go out after that if there's too many people. Maybe plan it for one day, maybe plan it for a picnic or something, pick one event, have those things set up.
Yeah, or even just like
Collect some
hiding
data.
what you got, like, this is all you have, and behind the back, you know, you've got, just in
Yeah.
case, but you show, hey, we didn't have to go into the back stock afterwards. Or, yeah, let's try it for this one event and see how it goes and make adjustments to it. It's low risk. Or, you know, we've protected you against something actually happening. If we're wrong, we have a backup plan. So there's low risk if this goes badly, but we can at least try it out and see if it works.
Wasn't that with the Embassy Suites? We didn't publicize that we're gonna make the plates smaller, did we?
No way to tell anybody.
Exactly, we just make
Probably
the
a good
plates
idea.
smaller, and then, you know, if you get feedback, then
Yeah,
you can accommodate those people
I
who are
guess-
complaining.
Yeah, so they didn't even buy new plates at first, they just used, instead of dinner plates, which is what they typically use, the 10-inch plate, they just used their salad plates
Oh, nice.
instead, which were 8 inches. So they didn't have to switch, they just
Such
used
money.
different plates, used those, proved that it worked, and then said, okay, we're gonna go buy some more plates, so we don't have to be, you know, we can actually have the backup
The right
plates
ones,
that we
yeah.
need.
Low
Yeah.
risk though of finding
Totally
out. If it
low.
didn't work, then you're not out of $10,000 of new plates.
And
Yeah.
I was saying earlier, they have a bacon ambassador now who serves bacon and the proteins at their buffet because that's their highest price product.
Yep.
And so they put him out there for a week to see if it would work. And they were like, oh yeah, this is saving us tons of money and it's paying for him being out there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then they just made that part of his job
Mhm.
and now he.
So you get
is
the
there.
measurements, and then you learn this is working or it's not working, and
Yeah.
we're gonna adjust it or bail on it or try something else. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's cool that you brought that up, you know, instead of just like it happens, recognizing that, yeah, that's kind of a strategy that we should maybe keep track of, you know, and reuse over and over.
yeah, so it's pretty interesting. I mean, it was kind of like, I found it really cool to be able to like bring forward that when we're doing the improvements, because you kind of, in the past, that was kind of assumed, okay, this should work, but it doesn't always work. And so to have a strategy to kind of look at ways to do, like they called it the minimum viable product. It is like the simplest, easiest, inexpensive way you can get feedback from that customer. And usually people think they have to build something to scale, and a lot of times it's like, no, you can use styrofoam. We don't have to actually make sheet metal items.
Mhm.
I was trying to think of another example where they, I think that was the one where they just basically cut out something out of cardboard and had like paper, and then they said, okay, here, and they're like handing them another sheet. Okay, you just press the button. This is what the next sheet looks like. Like, no development, very low technology. It's people like to make it fancy, and a lot of times, if you know the customer knows that they're part of this discussion and kind of figuring it out, they're not going to get too worried about like you're bringing in this sketchy looking thing as a testing area. So I think people get really concerned. We can't show this to the customer, or can't show it to, we can't roll this out like this. But if they're on board to that, it's usually that you can. You just have to coordinate that a little bit.
Mhm. I've done changes out in manufacturing where we'll sit and we'll plan it all out, and I'll say, okay, so it takes this long to change it over, and it'll take about this long to put it back. So if it doesn't work, we can put it right back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It'll be back there tomorrow. They're like, okay, we'll try it then.
We'll try that, yeah. Yeah, and that's, you know, getting people to do something different is a huge part of this too. I'll talk about it in a little bit here, but let's not waste our time going back to the old way if we don't have to, or we could have done something smaller and easier and figured it out. Much less effort. So this is, has anyone seen this video, hand washing for kids? So this is based on a methodology they'll talk about, but I like the framework really well for addressing behavior changes when you're ready to roll out something or get people to follow a process or do something that they're not doing today.
What you're about to see is real. Real kids doing real things. Just thought you should know. My name's Hiram Grenny, and I was there for the whole thing. So here's a question. What does it take to get people to change? And I'm not talking about their socks and underwear, but change behavior, especially when it's hard. For example, every year, close to 100,000 people die from hospital-acquired infections. That means people got sick at the hospital. And it turns out one of the main culprits is hand hygiene. That means just getting people to wash their hands could save lives. So my crack research team decided to conduct an experiment to see if we could change something as difficult as hand-washing habits, only with the toughest subjects of all, kids. So here's what we did. We took 80 munchkins and put them into groups. First, we gave them a challenging puzzle to put together. You know, kind of like the projects you adults are always busy with. Then, we gave the kids a tempting distraction.
Hey guys, I got the cupcakes for you right here. They're delicious. I'm gonna set them right over here.
Once I see that you guys have put the whole puzzle together correctly, I'll raise my flag, just like this, and then I'll blow my whistle. Okay, and when I do that, you guys can all go and get your cupcake. So what would it take to get these kids to wash their hands? How about a good reason? So one thing you guys should know, there was a sick kid in here playing with the puzzle pieces. He had a runny nose and coughed a lot, so there's probably a lot of germs on everything. But there's hand sanitizer over there on the table that you can use to wash up. Okay, which will win out? Delicious frosted cupcakes or the fear of the typhoid toddler? Let's watch. They finished their task, and look, if the threat of one sick kid wasn't enough, just look at all the new germs popping up. So with all those good reasons to wash, what do you think they'll do? Okay, so that was a colossal failure. Now what? Well, at this point, most adults would quit. That's why you just keep changing the year on those New Year's resolutions. With the next group of kids, I changed the environment by moving the hand sanitizer closer, and then put up a visual cue. This ought to make hand washing easier and more obvious, right? And in the end, the motivation to not get sick plus changing the environment didn't influence a single kid. Yikes! Next, I increased their ability, which is another source of influence. I had them all complete what is known as deliberate practice, or training, to increase their familiarity with good hand hygiene. Will adding another source of influence get these hand-washing offenders to wash up? Done. And... well, now we're seeing some better results. We're combining 3 different sources of influence, and some of the kids are actually washing their hands. It looks like we're on the right track. So next, I added another source of influence, social influence. What if somebody spoke up and said something? What would happen if their bosses were in the room with them? Here come the cupcakes. And there goes the flag. Will they wash? No! Look at them pouncing on those cupcakes like a pack of ravenous hyenas. But it's not too late, because something important happens. at just the critical moment, a peer, not even one of the bosses, speaks up.
Wash your hands.
Watch the effect. Success at last! So social motivation obviously made a difference. But was it the only thing that mattered? What about our other sources of influence? Here's what my kids had to say.
The sign. I was walking over to get my cupcake, but then someone said, wash your hands, because this boy had the sniffles in here.
So what's the point? We often underwhelm overwhelming problems. We try a couple of things, and when they don't work, we give up. But my dad and his colleagues discovered the secret to overcoming tough problems. You need to combine at least 4, preferably more, sources of influence. And it doesn't matter if you try it with kids or hospitals, at the office, or even at home. If you use 4 or more sources of influence, your chances for success go up 10 times. 10 times! So there it is. The key to changing almost anything is to marshal the power of at least 4 or more sources of influence, but preferably all 6. And heaven knows, we need it.
So to me, I was actually happy to see this because I was like, okay, it's not just, I know why things weren't working all the time. It's, I can't just sit there and continue to motivate them. It's only one source of it. I have to also build some infrastructure and support network for that person. And I also have to teach them, make sure they actually know how to do it. They might say, yeah, I know how to do this, but I never actually verified that. And maybe when they get in there, they really don't know. They just were really overconfident about that. Or just there's actually things in the process that actually make it harder to do that. And you guys see this all the time with recycling and the where you put the bins and how you locate things and the signage you use and the education around that. All that plays into success. So, and the rewards and recognition and the incentives and the motivation and the metrics that they're held to, all those things tie into this. And so looking at these in a couple different of these 6 different areas and say, we could do something here, we could do something here, and here, that's going to really help if you have like a 3, 4, 5-pronged attack on addressing the behavior, not just, well, we did a training class and why didn't that work? So to me, then I can think about these 6 categories and say, oh, you know what, we've only done 3 of the 6. It's probably why it's not really sinking in yet. So on our coffee cup thing, we've kind of come up with different things to fit into each of these buckets with discounts for the cup and educating people and then actually explaining this is what you do when you bring your cup to a coffee shop. And then having, accountability and pictures of people who bring their cup and saying, hey, this is the normal behavior we expect for people and this is who you contact if you have questions or you get stuck or you don't know the rules and these are resources you can go to. The shops can do things to make it easier. So thinking about these different avenues and sources, what they call it, makes it a little easier to kind of come up with a really solid plan. Thoughts? Examples you can think of where maybe you didn't have quite as many different perspectives or things put in place? Things didn't go as well, or when you think back on things that were successful, that you had multiple things that were done to get that behavior change?
For recycling and composting, we often will put a bin, we'll put the sign up, we'll try to get some of those things, but I don't think we're doing enough, I guess.
2 of them or 3 of them, maybe,
Yeah.
and not that
4th
fourth or
6th,
fifth. Yeah.
And then, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying a plethora of examples of failed just projects that were really hard to get off the ground because of that peer pressure component, I think that was interesting to see how they all got on board, 11 out of 12.
Yeah, it's
And
like
that-
they wanted to, but they forgot, but it's just the reminder was enough to be like, oh yeah, I am on board, I know what to do, but I just drew a blank at the time when I needed to do something.
Mhm.
So that was that missing piece, so that could have been the key, but then they asked the kids and they were like, no, it was a sign. It's like,
Yeah. I think I can think of at least 3 where I've had like all of those except for the peer pressure one, and that may have been the most important.
yeah,
Yeah, and it made it very difficult.
yeah, there's definitely weights to some of these depending on the type of problem it is, yep.
Mm.
I wonder if they'd taken away the other motivations and they just left it with like peer, if that would have made a difference.
Yeah, that's something they could have tried out, to isolate it.
To isolate which is
Yeah.
most effective, or do we really need a combination? Of course, the kids said that a few things stimulated them into doing
Yeah.
it, but really it felt like it was the peer one.
Yeah, they did, the book talks about getting rid of the guinea worm in Africa and the things they did about training and educating. So they go into a little bit more scientific studies around how they've deployed that to bigger challenges. And that it was, multiple things had to be done in terms of teaching others and calling people out, say, hey, you're not washing your hands properly, go back and do that, that's causing us problems here, like holding people accountable, that was part of their program, so, yeah, they have a lot more than that little video to kind of
Yeah.
support that it's for or more of those influences.
Well, I was going to say, when Alex was saying about the recycling compost and not maybe having enough, we have the signs and some resources, but then when I feel like we do see successes, is in addition to the signs and the resources, is getting the right people involved right from the get-go and making sure, I don't know, take a school for example, if a custodian is not part of the conversation, then it
Yeah.
could go upside down,
Yeah.
And so then there are other things we can check off that you see a noticeable difference. Another school's doing it, you're not doing it. Oh, okay, maybe we should do that.
Yeah,
That sort of thing.
yeah, absolutely. And you guys can bring that to the groups and
Exactly.
say, look, they're doing 5 of these things and you guys are only doing 2, and that's probably why it's not working as well. So I like that for thinking about behavior changes, because that's usually ultimately always part of the solution is someone's gonna have to do something different. Rarely is it just behind the scenes something happens and the problem goes away. It's usually there's behavior that has to take place. So, and then mistake proofing is kind of a concept to think about a lot. Is how can you simplify it so people can make errors or mistakes, because that could be part of the problem. I didn't hear the order right. I didn't get it typed in the system correctly. I grabbed the wrong item or ingredient, or I misheard the wrong number, and taking out as many of the opportunities to make mistakes and errors, which we're human and we will always make those. So mistake proofing is simple, easy, and effective, but very inexpensive devices that can be set up and created to minimize or greatly reduce or even eliminate the chance of a human making an error. And so little cutouts of here's the right size, and if you put this over and it scrunches the bun, you added too much of something in there. Or it's kind of like an inspection tool. I wasn't quite even sure exactly what they're doing. This was like the bun, and then the burger, and then the burger with the bun on top. Yeah, but it's kind of like a height gauge. Very simple and expensive though. To
Wow.
see if it didn't fit there, then you did something wrong. It's a visual of you left off something or you added too much of something.
They actually have those at McDonald's.
This is, yeah, it's on this photo, bun troubleshooting tool.
I'm going to get one.
Yeah. This one is the way they designed the hole and the size of this. You can't actually fit that tray, no matter which way you twist it. It won't actually go in because the way they designed it. And I've also seen it where they have like a magnetic strip around there, so if you try to put silverware, it clings to the side of that. So those are things you don't have to educate a whole lot if you just take out the opportunity for people to actually make the mistake.
It's like a manhole cover.
What's that?
It's like a manhole.
Manhole cover, exactly.
You
Yep.
can't drop it
You
in
cannot
the
get
hole
it in
no
there.
matter the round shape. Can't get it in.
And then you guys are familiar with this stuff, but this is pretty good visual for what goes where. It looks very specific to the area and to the locations. So you're not just putting random pictures up, but hopefully these are pictures that actually match what people are holding in their hands. So like, oh, I see my paper boat, this a paper boat right here, I can put that in this slot there. Doesn't mistake proof it, but, and then they'll mess around sometimes with the shape of the opening. So that kind of helps, like a slot like that is more for paper, and a circle would be more for cans and bottles, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody was saying the other day, making the bin that something's supposed to go in look like the item that it's supposed to go in. So if you're trying to collect like cans, have something that's
That's a
shaped
can.
like a can, looks like a can, people will put their cans in there.
Yeah,
Or like a stack of paper or whatever it
we
might
had
be.
the aisle where the Coca-Cola bottles, where it was a
Yeah.
Coca-Cola bottle, right? And then it had a little opening.
Yeah.
So, have you seen anything or any examples of mistake proofing where people have taken out the error, possibility of the error at all? You can see it a lot in like websites and stuff. You're filling out forms. It'll tell you this isn't an email address, or this isn't a phone number, or we can't find your address, or you don't have an account, or. But what about like non-technical stuff?
There was a school in Kansas that I worked with their district really closely on, and they were it's one of the only places I've ever been where the signage of what to put in the cans reflected what they sold, what was in the cafeteria. And it wasn't just this like, whatever's available
Generic.
to everyone, generic, yeah, and
Yeah.
it made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And the tray, it was like the color of the tray that they were actually, you know, it just looked exactly like what the kid was walking up with. And I think about that all the time, and it just drives me crazy. You have to like think through it for so long,
Yeah.
because it doesn't match the pictures.
And it's not perfect, but it greatly improves the situation, right?
At Habitat, to put tools away, we just put all the tools up there and then spray painted the wall. And so there was literally like, you would see the image there, so they knew that you'd put your drill right there because it was the shape of the drill. And then we would color code different panels, so the pink drill went on the pink wall in the pink drill shape, trying to keep it
Perfect.
simple as possible.
Yeah. And you can tell at a glance if something's gone or missing.
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff in like process improvement is first make sure you find problems when they do happen, and half the time is we don't know the problems are going on, and so you have to visualize that or make it obvious to tell. So these devices can be done to prevent problems, but also catch it right away. But the idea is not to throw a lot of technology at it. It's just come up with simple, easy ways. There's another one where they have like for pills is like a little scoop, and then the scoop would just have a spot the right size for the pill, and you just scoop it up and you have 30, and then that prevents miscounts versus someone taking a little tool and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They just scoop it out and drop it in, that's the right amount. So it just shortens the time and makes it more effective. So little things like that, and not very expensive solution to that. But there's like your gas caps have gone through an evolution of trying to make you not leave the cap off or lose the cap. And now they've even designed it out completely, I think, in newer cars.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, now it's just built into the.
built in, yeah.
Yeah, it's,
Like seals up when you're not using it. So yeah, so you see that kind of evolution in vehicles. They are really good at that stuff because they're dealing with a whole range of customer bases and skills and education levels and even language barriers. So they've done a good job of trying to mistake-proof how to operate a vehicle. So keep those kind of things in mind. Is can we actually eliminate or greatly reduce the human errors? Sometimes you feel like it's unavoidable, but there are things that usually you can do. So just doing a little like research, and I just kind of do Google searches on the images and kind of look for something that looks interesting. But colors work really well. Physical barriers, cutouts, that type of thing works really well too. Brett, anything you've seen or?
I like the button troubleshooting tool. I don't know.
Yeah.
You get your own one to take into these places and go, look. This is not legit.
Yeah, I have my own tool. I bought this sandwich the other day. It didn't meet the specifications. All right, so that's kind of on the improvement side. Now, when we get into control, the goal for this phase is to say, how do we maintain this? So when I always think about it this way: when people change over, and the people that were involved are gone off to some other opportunity, new people are going to come in. How do you make sure that they actually follow the process? Because they don't have that, they weren't invested in as much as the people that went through the improvement work. So the people with empathy, right? They're not always going to be there, and new people are going to come in and say, why are we having these small plates? Let's change those out again. Like, no, we had a whole purpose for that. So how do you make sure that's is sustainable? So one way is to get data and monitor it over time. And when you see interesting data points, it might be indications of new problems coming in or something that hasn't happened before that is new. So one of the tools is called statistical process control. It's basically a way to monitor data over time. So these would be different data points from oldest to newest. And the red line is calculated based on variation in the historical data. So if you have a lot of fluctuation in your results, your red lines are going to be really wide. If it's very consistent, then it's going to be really narrow around that. So these are actually calculated, and the idea is that if you see a data point that's outside the red, it's actually unusual based on the historical data. And so that should raise a flag that says, why did we get such, this was yield of a food item by date, and they had different batch sizes they would run and different flavors they would use, but based on the historical data, these were considered extremely unusually high yielding results. And then these would be unusually low yields and performance of that batch. And especially when they happen right in a row like that, that flags multiple kinds of situations. But there's actually rules that are, I'll show you here, that you look for in this pattern that will highlight a problem maybe earlier than you realize it's actually going on. And so one of the rules is as it goes outside of these red lines, then it's something you should look into, investigate, and figure out, not just say, hey, that one worked out really well. Well, why did it work out well? What did we do right? Or what made it successful that day? And why did we have a problem? What went wrong that day that was so unusually bad? If yield is better, higher, that's better. But there's other patterns to look at, and I'll show you those as well. But you can track things like actual performance of food itself, like sugar content, and take samples of product as it comes in and plot it on a chart and check for trends. Is it getting worse or better over time? And maybe that's going to create taste issues or quality issues, or it's going to impact the shelf life of the product. Dimensional size things like the bun, size of the buns, maybe they're getting smaller for some reason, and then you're going to get more complaints. Moisture content, the quality of the material, so different fruits and vegetables might have different things you can measure about them. So these would be things you probably would sample throughout a day or throughout a week. And just to say, snapshot, how are things going? And not just say, oh, it's within the requirement we have, but actually trend it. And I'll show you the patterns that you can see that will highlight that something's going on. Temperatures of equipment, weights of product. If you're actually packaging up something and there's a weight on it, there's requirements on that. But maybe it's trending to a point where there's a problem and it's actually gonna be underweight or overweight too much at some point, so you want to jump on that right away. Compost levels, food scrap, waste, that type of stuff. Lots of things you can monitor and say, are we unusually high or low? Attendance numbers could have been from Reed's study. They could start to monitor, track that, and say, when do we have really good days and really poor days, and what do we learn from that? So the rules that, there's actually 8 rules. And so this is the first one, was that a data point's outside of, basically there's a 99.7% chance that it'll be within the red lines. So if it's out, that means it's a really, really small chance that it would be out without there being something wrong. So you should at least go look at it. Maybe it's a fluke and maybe there's nothing wrong, but it's usually an indicator there's something going on or something happened. Usually it's an error or mistake was made. Someone wrote down the wrong par number, or someone overrode the number and said, no, I'm gonna add 5 more this time, and oops, now we have a higher number. And we can trace back and say, why did that happen, and how do we correct that? The other one here is if you get a bunch of high numbers, 9 in a row, that's considered, even though it doesn't go outside of the lines, it's all of a sudden the results are running higher than normal. So after the 9th one, that's statistically would be very unusual to get 9 straight like that. So it breaks a probability assumption, and then it says you should probably look into that. You're probably something shifted in your process. And maybe it's a good thing. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. It could be a really good sign that, hey, look, all that work is starting to pay off. We're actually getting higher than normal on average results. This one is 6 in a row, each data point going up, or you have the opposite situation where each data point is going down from the previous one, and it happens 6 straight times. That's another pattern that says you should go investigate. This one is just a series of up-down results. This is supposed to be like a random data points. You shouldn't see like consistent patterns like that. Usually this indicates there's another grouping. Like there's an upper group and a lower group of results, and I'm picking up, down. So maybe it's the morning shift and then the afternoon shift, or it's the one shift versus another shift. And so you're picking up a variable that's creating variability of fluctuations in the results. And it's jumping, the data is jumping back from those 2 people or 2 groups back and forth, and that's what you're really picking up. It shouldn't be like that consistent. This one is you almost had 2 data points that were outside of the limits, but they were very close, but they happened right next to each other. So that's like, ooh, we almost went out twice in a very short period of time. That's not good. There's probably something happening there. 4 out of 5, again, a run of a series of low or really high data points. Didn't go outside the limits, but it got really close. And it happened a bunch in a short period of time. And then this one is interesting. This one is good in the sense of less variability, but it's saying that something did get better, your variability got less, and that might be a good sign. But I had a situation where we were doing this we were measuring the thickness of coating that we put on a part, and we saw that pattern, and we're like, all right, cool, we're getting more consistent or more reliable, and turns out the woman that was doing the data was changing the results, not intentionally, but she was like, I don't like that number, and she kept looking for like data that she liked. Yeah. And I was like, that's not really what we're trying to measure. Like, I think your heart's in the right place here, but we're trying to just collect random data points, not fishing for the data points you think look the best. That's not the intent of the data collection tool. So we had to correct her. So it flagged that there was an improvement and less variation, but it actually wasn't a real improvement. She changed the way she was measuring.
I was listening to a podcast today that was talking about when you start collecting data, your employees will
change
behavior to get that data.
Yeah,
right.
No matter what. Like they will start moving, they'll disregard other things to get to that data that you want.
Mm-hmm.
You'll
that
see,
number that you want.
sometimes it's an actual improvement, like, oh, we're concerned about this, I'm going to actually work on.
But at the
They're not
cost
actually
of
going to
other
measure
things,
it.
perhaps.
That's right, too. It could be not a good overall thing.
Yeah.
Or you just, because you're measuring and people are paying attention, people are being more diligent, like, oh, that's a problem now? Okay, I'm going to be careful now. So oftentimes I see this as you start collecting the data and things will get better and you haven't done anything yet. Mm-hmm. And you have to really question, is this good improvement, or we're just being careful, or we're being cognizant of the issue now? So some people say, oh, that problem went away. Well, we still got to figure out why it got better or what was going on before that. Mm-hmm. We had a situation where there was a problem, and every time we tried to do an experiment, we could never replicate it because people were being very careful and diligent with the experiment. And so they would do studies we had to tell them it wasn't an experiment anymore. So we could actually replicate real life scenarios because people changed behaviors. Again, they thought someone's watching or they're going to be looking at these very closely, and it absolutely just does change results. So yeah, that's where you want to also bring not only the technical piece, but you have to bring that practical application knowledge to that. Just says, I think what we're picking up is actually something else going on there. I'm not just gonna blindly believe the data. And there's the other one where you have data that doesn't, it's like the opposite of this one, that there's no data in the middle of near the average. So like you have, again, some kind of like separation of the data results. You should have, a lot of the data should be near the average. And this is showing an example where there's a bunch of data that wasn't in the middle of the data set, so. Too widespreading data. But these are like based on statistics and probability, and they're built into like software packages to detect these, but back in the day, we'd have to just train people to look for those patterns. And so every time they're plotting something by hand, which you can still do, and it's very effective, but it's harder to find these patterns like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oh, no, didn't break that rule. 1, 2, 3, 4, nope. It takes a little longer to assess it. So that's something we're trying to put in place, is some monitoring of the process with data that we can track. And then the idea was, if you saw like this, oftentimes the data has to get way out here or way down here before someone gets really alerted to it. And what this tells you is, back here there's something happened, and right now you're getting flagged early, but normally we don't find out about it till way out here, days, weeks, maybe months later. And the sooner we can pick up some of these things because we're tracking it, we can actually respond and adjust and get back on track. Instead of saying, oh, this problem's been going on a long time. You know, people tracking romaine lettuce, if they were monitoring things a little more closely, they could have found that issue sooner and gotten quicker containment and not had as much to deal with after the fact. So it's a really good way to get ahead of bigger problems before they become major issues. So there's a whole different types of charts you can create, but it's all kind of based on this thing that you're just trending the data over time and looking to see if the patterns will tell you a lot of information about the process. Someone done something like that or tracked?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah. I've run across every possible scenario. All the readings are really good. You quit checking them.
You just wrote down the same numbers every time. Didn't even take
Has to
them.
be within this range, so they just write down in that range, or, you know, or whatever.
Yeah. I can pick up stuff in supplier data. I'm like, I know, I can see what you guys are doing. Like, you're ignoring or you're remeasuring stuff that's marginal or outside the specs, and you're remeasuring it, and magically it measures inside the spec. The data you're sending me is not showing the same pattern I would expect to see if you're not messing with it a little bit. So you can get pretty good at actually picking up little issues like that.
Yeah, we measured color in 3-dimensional space. And so you could see where they would be checking something and it'd be way out, and then it would just kind of work its way back in there, and then it would just stay there.
Yeah.
Okay, something happened. What did you change over here?
Yeah.
You know, different tools, something like that.
You can track like equipment performance, and all of a sudden it starts to trend down, and then all of a sudden, a couple days later, the equipment's not working right. Huh, well, if you were trending this, you could have seen 7 days ago that something went wrong, and then it's starting to wear and break down basically, and it was telling you that with the data, but no one was tracking it, and then you were surprised that there was a problem, and now you're really out of luck. So could have been detected a little earlier and avoided, or at least you jumped on it a little sooner if you're trending these things. So it's one of the tools we really push for in the control, is having a way to monitor the data over time. So if there is a new problem or something happens, new person comes in and they're not doing it the same way, the data will help you identify something's changed. Also helps validate improvements too. If you see that it's trending down, that's kind of confirmation that what you're doing is working, if that's the goal, to bring the number down. So that's another way we've used these charts. Other tool then is just really kind of instilling a program to talk about and review key metrics and goals on a daily basis with your team. And so a daily huddles or daily management system is kind of this foundation that says, you know, basically 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most with your team. The team should be cross-functional. So let's say Embassy Suites, I don't know if they actually had like a daily meetings or huddles that they would get together and all talk about, here's what the plan is today, and,
Yeah,
okay,
in the kitchen.
okay. And so usually it would involve should involve like the hostess, the cooks, the servers, maybe even janitorial, and everybody's hearing the whole story about, here's how we did yesterday, it was a good day, we had low amount of food waste, here are the complaints the customers had. So overall it was a great day, or it was a really crappy day yesterday, and we had this many absentee call-outs, and you're just giving people a formal report of how it went. Because a lot of people will say, I don't know how we're doing, and it's really hard to motivate people in a job if they never know if they're succeeding or doing well or not. So first thing is tell them how they're doing. Secondly is say, let's talk about the issues that came up, and that starts the problem-solving process. To say, why did that happen? Not blaming people, but getting to the root of it. Why did we put them out there without the right training? Why did we get that rush of people? Why didn't we know about this bus of people showing up? Why couldn't we have predicted that better? Who didn't communicate properly? We start trying to address some of those problems. And then what's the plan for today? Okay, we got this coming up, this is happening, be careful about this, watch for this. At 10:30 we got this group coming in, but a bunch of people have allergy things. You're just trying to set yourself up for success for the rest of the day. And then what can we do today to, knowing that we have 2 people gone and we have 3 extra tables more than we expected, what are we going to do about that? Instead of just throwing our hands up, what can we do? Well, we could pull someone from upstairs. They can come down and help out. We could call in 2 other people. Maybe the other manager can help out today. So you mitigate that, and then everyone's leaving that with a clear direction of what's going on for the rest of the day. And hopefully that will lead to some more success for that day. And then you're giving people different opportunities to be the leader of that review, and so you have a clear agenda each time, and you go through the same questioning, and it's usually a board, like a whiteboard that they put the metrics up, so anyone can see it at any time. But it's a discussion point, and then you just kind of roll through the different parts of the board. And you don't get into the heavy details, you take those offline. It's just a quick update, and it's a standing meeting, so you're not sitting down and getting comfortable, so that'll force people to kind of speed it up a little bit. So I'll show you an example at a hospital. And the guy that, Matt, who founded the Lean Portland organization we have, he works at Vancouver Clinic, and he just did a little tour we had Restore come out, and who else came out? Free Geek, and showed them their management system, and it's actually tiered, so they have like a lower level one, and then issues that need to be escalated get rolled up to the next level, and then that gets up to the CEO within a matter of 2 hours. They're doing a company-wide review of issues at like 10 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning. And so the escalation of the problems up to top management is really quick instead of days or weeks.
Okay, so thank you guys for coming to the 5-minute huddle. I promise it will only be 5 minutes. So today is April 30th, and as you can see, our demand for the day is we have 6 DAS and we have 2 patients in emergency, so that's a total of 8 patients. So we'll just maybe go through the board here and go individually through each bay to kind of see where we're at. So bay 1.
I have 1 discharge before 2, and then I have another one after 2, and I don't have any concerns whatsoever with either one of those. So I think we'll make the time.
Perfect. Thanks, Angela. Bay 2. Michelle, would you mind just covering for them?
So we have no discharges either before 2 or after 2. So.
Okay, perfect. And bay 3, Maddie?
I have 4 discharges before 2 and 0 after 2. With the discharges, I just am waiting for some scripts on one of them.
And I did talk to the doctor about it, and he'll be coming up later to write the script.
Okay. And do you have any problems or anything, Maddie, being that you kind of have some of the bigger discharges here?
I do have lots of heavy patients, so if I could get some help with some free bays, that'd be good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Maddie. And bay 4?
Okay, so 1 discharge before 2 p.m. and then 1 after 2 p.m.
Okay.
And everything seems to be good.
Great. And bay 5, I know they were a bit heavy too, so Michelle?
So we have 1 discharge before 2, 1 after, and that does not seem to be a problem. We just have to have the doctor come up and write the order.
Okay, so as we started off the day with 0 empty beds, and so our discharges before 2, as we add them up here, come to 7. And as you can see, our demand is 8, so we're at -1, so we do need to make 1 more bed. Is there any of our discharges after 2 that you think we could possibly move before 2? And how can we?
I could probably run down and get the script from the doctor from the office.
Okay, and so what bay would that be on? Bay?
That's
Other
I
bay
think it was
1
bay
or
on my bay. Bay
yeah.
4.
Bay 4? Okay, so we can try to move that to before 2, and then at least we'll know that we'll make our demand for the beds today. Because we did talk to our sister unit 5F, and they were unable to assist us, so we do have to make that bed. So if we can get that discharge before 2, then at least we know we have all of our, we can pull all of our patients. So I then just want to talk a little bit about our staffing. So our baseline, as you know, is 13, and today we actually had a sick call, so we're working at 12. But I did talk with Michelle, and we kind of went around the bays to see if everybody was okay, and we've decided that we were able to still function and provide safe care with 12 on today, so that's good. And then, do you need any help? So I know that Maddie, you had mentioned that because you kind of have the heavier bay in most of the discharges.
Yeah.
So are we able to maybe pull together, is there a bay that might be able to help Maddie with some of those discharges?
Yeah, I think our bay can, since also our other discharge for the afternoon got bumped up. So we should have some free staff. So if you just want to call us whenever you need that discharge, we'll send somebody over.
That would be great. Yeah. Thanks for doing that. Any safety concerns or anything? Any falls or wandering patients?
Oh, I have a wandering patient. Yeah, in room 7. So if we could just all keep our eyes and ears out for him. I do have a note on his back, but he wandered a couple times last night at HS. So I just want to make sure that we're all looking for him.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Angela. And then just issues related to any equipment or supplies or anything. I actually noticed down on bay 2, one of the pot lights is flickering. So I did contact electrical today, and they're aware, and they will come and switch that out for us. Just a quick little thing on the D-1. As you know that tomorrow we have 2 D-1s, and we have 4 historically coming in. So we need to be aware that we might that we're going to have to make a couple of beds. Although I did talk to 5F, and they are actually able to take a couple of our DAS tomorrow. So we should be at 0. So that should be good. And then again, just with some hand hygiene, you guys are doing really great with that, and we're continuing to monitor that because we want 100% compliance. And again, it's just to make sure that we don't have any jewelry, any jeweled diamonds. You can wear a plain band, our nails are clean, and no polish or gel nails. So you guys have been doing really great on that, and we continue to do our 5 daily blind audits. So. And other than that, I think just as Angela had said, there was just that wandering patient. So we do just want to make sure too that that there isn't any at risk for falls or anything like that. So so far we've been pretty good on that, and there's been no staff injuries. So again, our TLR is working well. So. But I think that's probably about our 5 minutes. So thanks for coming to the huddle. And
one of the diagrams I had up there was a little plus sign. So what these are is little visual indicators. So if you took a step back, you didn't know anything about this area, the letter represents a metric of some sort, like Q would be quality, and D would be delivery, and P would be productivity or performance or something like that, and or E for environment. And you have these different criteria that says if we meet these criteria, however they're defined, you get a green in that day. And each of these boxes represents a day of the month or day of the week. And at a glance, you can see if we're getting a lot of reds, we're struggling with that metric or that issue. If we're getting a lot of greens, we're doing pretty well with it. So it's just another way of kind of presenting information and data to a team that isn't a bunch of numbers, but it's just kind of visuals. So in healthcare, I see a lot of just the plus signs. But in other areas, you get more of these metrics put together. So I have templates for these if you want them. But it's just nice for people to kind of get at a quick glance, see how are we doing and which areas you're struggling with. So this one I kind of see, all right, recently looks like got some reds in quality and delivery. That's kind of the things that might stand out. It may be more obvious in certain other metrics. But you define what the criteria is for those particular days. Anyone use anything like that, or anything, any kind of visuals? It's a good place to start before you just start getting into charting out data, just kind of something that at least says, we're looking at these things and we're kind of statusing each day, and you could review that as part of the huddle.
Yeah, I like the shapes, that's kind of a cool
Shapes.
thing.
Yeah, just kind of a quick glance. Okay, I know that's related to inventory. And you can make up whatever shapes you want, but I think I've got another one for F and M, maybe. And a C for like customer or cost or something like that. Also, summary reports is really important. So after you have some successes, to document those. And usually the goal is to keep it like a one-sheet summary. So whether it's a infographic or it's a poster board or not necessarily a paper, but maybe a one-page summary. We'll talk about those real quick here, but definitely document what you do so that when you go back to it maybe 6 months, a year later, or someone says, hey, you're working on Embassy Suites things. Can you tell me a little bit about it? You're like, sure, read this PowerPoint, or here's my report or something, and you don't have to verbally go through the whole story again. But it's nice to kind of capture and wrap up your project. Is really good for, it's good for your resume, it's good for just sharing, what did I do? How did I bring value to my organization? So we usually track savings up to 12 months just to make sure that it actually did sustain and it didn't just fall apart after a couple months. And you can capture hard and soft savings too. Some things are hard with, like the financial organization would say, yep, that's real savings. Soft is, well, you got some time savings, but doesn't mean people used that time wisely that you freed up. They could have just taken longer breaks. You know, so you can't say there's a true savings there, but we think if you save enough time, it'll result in some hard benefit like sales, or you can reduce labor costs or something like that. And so there's different formats for this, but it's called A3, which is getting all your status of your project in one sheet and updating that each time, but it forces you to be concise about your information versus having 16 PowerPoint slides. To get it into one sheet, depending on the level of detail you want, it makes you think about what's the most critical information I'm trying to share. And so that exercise, it really makes it simpler to stop from rambling on about your updates. So you can do lots of updates on where projects are at when people are concise about how they present it.
One of the best things about A3 is it doesn't fit on PowerPoint.
It doesn't, yeah. It's hard to do that.
Yeah, so you have to actually sit down and write what you're doing and then show it to people, and you actually communicate with people. Because you can't, it just doesn't fit in the PowerPoint very well.
Yeah. A lot of people do it by hand just because it's,
Yeah.
you can
We do
update it
all
with
ours
pencil
by
and
hand.
paper. Do you still? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Guys are like, no, I'll go in and I'll type it out. Yeah, I think so.
So just to kind of summarize the workshop here, I think these tools can assist with a lot of the efforts that are going on. Like there's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen too, but these is some really solid tools that have been used by many companies over decades with success. So we can apply this to a lot of sustainability efforts too. And that's really my passion, is to kind of bring this into more of the sustainable projects we have going on. And that DMAIC framework I showed is really a good framework to use on any kind of challenging or large or difficult challenges you have, because it forces you to kind of go step by step through this methodology, which is going to give you high success rate at the back end. I'll have the fourth one. I'm going to work on that this weekend so I can get it out much faster and lean out my process a little bit. The way to actually learn from this training is to actually practice. And so I think we talked about how can we go forward with some projects. If you know of, Brett and myself and other volunteers through Lean Portland are here to assist with that work, especially if it's nonprofit or government related. If it's for a for-profit business, I can talk about what our role might be with that, but I think we can assist in some way, and there's good tools out there, but I think just to practice those through a project is the best way to learn. So I think just trying to figure out what would be a good project going into 2019. Is there a need to do this workshop series again with a different audience, or do we just focus more on picking up projects, going through a project charter, getting a team together. I think I'm kind of looking for input on that. We don't have to do it right now, but just kind of think about that over the next, the rest of the year. Maybe in January I can send out some information or try to get some ideas from you guys on where do we go from here. And then there's some, the next workshops coming up is there's a happy hour lean brain thinking. That's a guy from healthcare, Brock Husby, something like that. He's has a lot of healthcare experience. He'll talk about lean. Kiel has a workshop on financial applications with lean and how they're kind of conflict. So he's got an interesting workshop. And I have a Six Sigma one in January, and we have a regular happy hour. So those are all free to attend. The one's a donate what you want type of thing.
You said you'll send this out, Brian?
Yeah, I'll send out the slide deck, yep. And then I'll hopefully get the video posted soon. Anything else? So I'll touch base maybe in January and see like what help do you guys need, or where we're happy to go meet with groups or meet with teams, or yeah, I'm not sure. Just kind of, but I did want to kind of go through this series and say this is what I think is useful, but I don't know how much of that is really useful. So that's where we'll kind of experiment here. So hopefully some of the things are good idea starters.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Cool.